Welcome to Connect Vegas, a podcast that interviews the leaders and creators who build our community. The people who make Las Vegas into the best place to live, work, and visit. And now, here is our host, Ben.
Hi, my name is Ben, and I'm introducing another episode of the Connect Vegas podcast. This episode features Andrew Woods of the Center for Business and Economic Research from UNLV. I started attending some of his in-person events several years ago called Brews and Economic Views, and I thought they did a nice job of bringing together both an academic and a real-world look at what's happening in various aspects of our economy. Yogi Berra had a great line that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. And he really brings all of that together in these events that talk about not just what the charts and tables tell us, but the real world stories of what's happening on the ground. I got really a lot of value in getting to know and meet Andrew, and I know that you'll enjoy this conversation as well. Thank you. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Connect Vegas podcast. I'm here with Andrew. Andrew, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Ben, thanks for having me on. My name is Andrew Woods. I am the director of the fabulous University of Nevada, Las Vegas Center for Business and Economic Research.
And can you give us an overview of the center and what type of work you do?
Sure. So the center itself has been in Las Vegas for 50 years as part of the Lee Business School here at UNLV. We are applied economists. So our colleagues in the Department of Economics, they teach students, they conduct foundational research to the field of economics and contribute to that knowledge base. We take their knowledge and others across the country, synthesize it, and try to put it into practice here in Las Vegas, supporting government, business, nonprofit. Think of us like consultants, but on behalf of the taxpayer.
Now, I've heard you talk about the center for several years now, and I can tell how much of your heart goes into this work, and you take a lot of pride on. I've heard you talk about population estimates, forecasts that have come true decades later. Maybe you could talk generally about what makes the center special and that lineage and history that you bring forward.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. So last year was our 50th anniversary, and as part of that, it was in the build up to that anniversary and our celebration at our annual event, we got to go through our archives. And it was pretty incredible to see in 1975, when CBER was founded, we had about 330,000 people living here in Southern Nevada. And now we have 2.4 million. But CBER since then has been a pivotal member and have done tremendous work to help grow the community. So from the get-go, we were brought in with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Interstate Bank, the Nevada Development Authority. Back then in the 1970s, before computers, before information was widely accessible, just to figure out what our demographics were. They knew maybe a general total population, but we didn't know anything about who they were, the income level, the education, the backgrounds, the skill level, the workforce. And so for the first 5-10 years, we played a pivotal role of going out surveying and getting that information and synthesizing it for the community, which was published publicly through the Review Journal and for planners and businesses to use. And as part of that was with development of casinos, they needed to know what their workforce looked like and the skill level and what were, of course, average wages, so they could set wages accordingly. And so they used a lot of that work. And then later on, as the economic skills got more sophisticated, and as a center and as a school, we got more sophisticated, we were then brought in to actually do not public policy, but actually business development. We were doing high-speed rail studies in 1986. We were going out and surveying attendees to the annual National Finals Rodeo, that we still host today, to get into consumer spending habits so that our businesses and LVCVA and others, Las Vegas Convention Visitors Authority, could better tailor to the audience and understand how they were spending their money. And in the 90s, as growth really took off, we were looking at everything from like how many individuals in the community did not lack health insurance, to bioterrorism preparation, to understanding some of the first entertainment studies, what we call today the sports entertainment economy. We were doing stuff on like the Grateful Dead, which was a proving ground to show that Vegas could host large entertainment type concerts, not just the residencies that we know and love, but having like large acts come through town. And one of those that was published in an academic journal was about the Grateful Dead and their series of concerts that occurred here in the 90s. So we were just involved in a wide variety of projects, but things that started then that we still do today that are pivotal for the growth of our community and our success is in 1997, we started working with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, Clark County Regional Transportation Commission in Clark County to do the annual population forecast. So it wasn't necessarily looking just at what we have today, is, a lot of that information is easily accessible, but looking more into the future. So could we forecast 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future? And as part of that, you can ask questions about what does employment look like? What do the industries potentially look like? What are the skill gaps? What are incomes, affordability, housing, all of that, because this is really looking at demand into the future and planning for that demand so that we can maintain quality of life. And because of like the work my predecessors were doing in the 90s and in the 2000s, we've been able to, for example, help the water authority reduce total water consumption by something like 26%, despite adding another million more people to the valley since then. So we get involved in all sorts of different work today. We focus on things from economic development to diversification, to labor force, to healthcare, to transportation. We're generalists. I don't think of us as the traditional economics platform where you are a mile deep and an inch wide. We are probably a little bit more half a mile deep maybe, but also probably a couple feet wide in terms of the different areas that we know and work on. And basically the way I approach it is what questions are not getting answered in the community that we can lend to. So we're looking for our competitive advantage is adding that baseline information to areas that maybe need some help, but there's not private resources necessarily to throw at them, where they're limited private resources or public resources. And so we can take on some of those more challenging tasks that they're not always the most eye-catching, I'll say. Sometimes it's very cut and dry information, but it's things that the community then can't operate, or if we ignore it, it just creates a bigger problem. But again, the market itself isn't satisfying. Forces aren't there to fix the problem or look and investigate the problem.
If I may, you've mentioned the type of research you're doing, but perhaps you could give us some insights on what in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of the growth in the valley and what we need to do. Do we need to find people who don't drive and drink water to move here, or what are the things you're looking out for?
If Silicon Valley gets its way, it might just be robots, right? They just need a lot of power, which I guess we're not quite sure we're going to get at. Maybe outer space or something, or the demands there. But kidding aside, so we're forecasting about 340,000 additional residents in the next 20 years here in Southern Nevada. But that number, I want to preface, is in flux, because that, again, we run this every year. That is based on trends we saw in the last couple of years. But the most recent trend, as we know, is that international migration with the change in policy and change in administration, has slowed down significantly. And something we did notice after the pandemic is that the trend in international migration to Southern Nevada was carrying about 2/3 of the growth for people moving here from elsewhere. So let me put this a little bit more simply. Before the pandemic, 2/3 of that growth when people moved here was coming from what we call domestic migration, with the majority coming from as California. We know that Californians were still moving here after the pandemic, and particularly maybe a certain segment and subtype, but actually that has shrunk as a share of the people moving here versus international migration, which kind of cuts against the grain of some of the popular myth out there that it's all Californians moving here. It's not. It's actually a lot of international migrants, and it's not the stereotypical as we might think from South and Central America, as the news puts out, it's actually from South and Central Asia. And a lot of those countries, a lot of those people migrated here to not only the United States, but to Nevada, and we've been a popular spot for them. And there is a big question: what happens in an environment where you already have a slowing birth natural growth rate through births minus deaths, but now you throw in a sharp decrease in international migration? It's thought that we won't be growing. The median age in Clark County is still roughly a year younger than the national average. So we have a slightly younger population than the rest of the country, but we can't rely on the natural growth rate to push us through as maybe in the past, just like the rest of the country. We're really susceptible in terms of our growth to who is moving here and what is that demographic. So that's one thing we're keeping a very close eye on and a bit concerned about. In terms of, I get the question all the time: are we going to run out of water? Are we going to run out of land? I am not necessarily the water or land expert, but when we make these forecasts, we're asked not to make the assumption that those things are limiting factors. Instead, that the policy will come around to ensure that they're still there. For example, again, is the way we've worked with the water authority is they go out and make the policy over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and as well as the investments needed so that we reduce water consumption on a per capita basis, which they have done. And therefore we can then accommodate, say, another million more people. The land issue, which I have colleagues that work on this for every day versus me working on it every month, who know far more about this, but we do know we have a land shortage. It is reaching a critical point. It's not easily fixed. It takes Congress, it takes local leaders, it takes state leaders. Everyone from dog catcher to president has to have some say in this and help to fix it. And it will be an issue if we indeed have, say, another 340,000 people living here. To put it in perspective, it's like adding another city of Henderson in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Where would those people go? And some of this too is then the code and development. An issue I think of and worry about and lose sleep about is, as we add more people, also the quality of life argument. Do we have a system that pays for itself to maintain that quality of life? Is it paying for enough public safety? Is it paying for schools? Is it paying for parks in a manner that is appropriate but also sustainable?
Yeah, those are wonderful insights. I appreciate your sharing that. I want to come back to CBER in just a moment, but I do like to get a little bit of background about our guests. Can you tell us where you grew up and what were your hobbies when you were a young person?
I will tell your listeners, I am not a native Nevadan. I am a transplant like so many others, but I have been here for close to 15 years. And I married a Nevadan who was raised here since she was 5 years old and went to public school and is graduated 4 times from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So if there's anyone who bleeds UNLV more than me, it's my wife. But so I married well, I guess is what I'm really getting at. But I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. My father worked in trade for the Port of Tacoma, and my mother was a chemist. She worked in the healthcare field, but retired when I was 10 years old to stay home. And I grew up, certainly as I look back on it, like I had a lot of help more than I realized and give credit for. But I can tell you, by the time I was 18, I was ready to get the hell out and was frustrated and didn't like my parents and was grumpy, moody teen. But I was smart. At least I think I was smart. Of course, I'd say that. And I got a scholarship to go to school on the East Coast. And I also had my grandmother really encouraged me to follow my passions. And so I did go to school out in Washington, D.C., and some of that was paid for through, again, the scholarship through the school, which made it possible. Otherwise, it's crazy how much we pay on higher ed, except I think UNLV is very affordable compared to many other places, my own opinion. But I studied political science and economics. I thought I was going to go to law school like so many of my peers. Thankfully, I did not, though I have many friends that are lawyers, and ended up instead working in political campaigns and jumped around the country for 10 years, eventually owning and running a business here in Nevada. But I was recruited originally to Nevada to work for the state treasurer at the time, Kate Marshall. And I got involved in some ballot questions. Some were successful, some were not. I worked for everyone from dog catcher, which we actually don't have in Nevada, so that joke doesn't really work, but you get the point, to bundling for fundraising for presidents and running ballot questions and helping governors and city council. And by the end of it, it was bipartisan, I think is something that not too many people get to say these days, given where we are, the state of things, but worked on a lot of different issues. And as I was doing that, I was doing things similar to what I ended up doing for CBER, which is working on tax policy, development of the medical district, doing kind of scoping out labor force and workforce concerns, because we help get a lot of people elected, but budgets are small, staffs are small, resources are stretched. And so I ended up helping them do more academic grounded studies. And as I was doing that, I decided to get my master's in Chicago, at the University of Chicago in the evenings. And so I commuted back and forth for a year and a half, getting my master's at Chicago, but working and running a business full time here with a staff, by the way, it wasn't just me, here in Las Vegas. And then I joined CBER in 2020.
So a lot of people in the political world focus on the horse race side of things and just all the tremendous amount of activity and the fundraising in that area. But you gravitated more toward, I want to say, the policy or the wonkier side of it. What led you to find where you are now? What led you on that path to the more policy and data-driven focus?
I'll try not to get Freudian here, but as a kid, I really loved Legos. And so how things fit together and building these monumental sets and then taking it all apart and rebuilding it in a different way and doing something different. And that really helped my imagination, my creativity, and my willingness to get in the weeds. And when I was working in policy and politics, my thinking was not just about the horse race, but what happens afterwards. And how do you actually build common ground and real policy that actually means something and is a legacy for individuals who make that sacrifice to go into public office? And as part of that, you're researching how an economy works. Who are the employers? Who are the employees? How does certain laws factor into people's decisions and incentives and their actualization of self-rationalization and personal interests? How do all these, and why are some communities more successful than others at, say, in an economy, but others are better at quality of life, which is a different factor. You can have a job and get paid and put dinner on the table, which can be very important, is very important. But if you're also unhappy or you feel like the schools are bad or the roads are terrible and the traffic sucks and everything's unaffordable, that doesn't matter what the job is, right? It's also your quality of life. So I lived and worked in these different communities around the country before I came to Nevada, like roughly 15 years ago. And I saw everything from rural Indiana to high-tech Northern Virginia to Rust Belt, West New York, so West Side of New York, then later on Chicago, and financial power and entrepreneurship and big egos. And then you get to back to the West, which I love, where you've got things are a little bit more down to earth. You've got a little bit more of that libertarian and free spirit, but at the same time, there's a sense that, hey, we shouldn't do people wrong either. And so just understanding how those things work, how relationships really matter, how someone takes a small business and it ends up being, say, a Fortune 500 company or a Fortune 1000 company or one of the largest law firms, just understanding how people gain economic power, but also the employees and the people that work for those organizations and their passions and their dreams and why that fits together really led me to want to then get into this world, more of the policy side and how this is very complicated. It is human driven, but at the same time, if the solutions are created by the challenges are created by humans, then probably the solutions are going to be man-made as well.
That's a very compassionate, empathetic way.
Not Machiavellian.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You're talking about things that are, there's a lot of hard data and you're analyzing probably mountains of data. but you're really understanding that this is all about people at the end of the day. And that's, I don't know, I wish I heard more of that sentiment in the public discourse today without getting into a whole thing.
And I'm sure that's for another speaker, right? About the public discourse today. Yeah.
Another podcast, really.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the work of your organization. And you may have already described this, but I want to make sure I'm clear. The work that you all do, is it you have an annual charter to do these certain reports, or is it a stakeholder comes to you and requests something? How does that transact?
That's a great question. So there are things we have been doing for a long time, like the population forecast. And it is a responsibility that we take very seriously, and we're very humbled that while no one wakes up in the morning worrying about population forecasts, if we mess that up in any way, it can have long-term challenges and issues that we don't want to see happen. And so we take it, so that alone and those responsibilities and these kind of legacy projects, one is our bread and butter of understanding where the world is and where it's going in the long run, which for economics, we love to talk about the long run, but then the joke is everyone's dead in the long run. So why doesn't it matter? So in the short run, we have two different approaches where we do get solicited by government agencies, local, state, even national. We've done federal grants and sometimes federal projects. And we will, when those come in, it's basically a screening process that myself and our research team look at the merits of what we're being asked to do and ask ourselves, can we do this? Can our students do this? Because we have 7 students who work for us. We give them this work, real world. But just as importantly, since we are unique in our position and carry with that great responsibility, there has to be some public interest to this. So when people come to me and they want us to do like a revenue plan or something that is very much has a strong business case for it and not just a public case to it, I tend to refer them to our friends and people we know out in the private sector or in another area, discipline potentially, and say this is more for them than us, because if I can't really defend this as a good use of taxpayer dollars, even though they might be subsidizing some of the research. So I always am thinking in my mind, like, how would this look if this is when it comes out, or how are we going to be judged if we were to take on this project again? But we've done things, for example, gaming, for example, around consumer preferences for responsible gaming technologies, which we did with Aristocrat several years ago that we're very proud of. It was an international survey across 3 different countries looking at consumer preference to help them be more effective in their use of gambling responsibility tools and mechanisms and procedures to see what was the preference level there. So we will work with private industry. It just has to be kind of the right fit for us, where there's some sort of quote public good to it. The third is our own external work, which we're very external facing, which again is unique within the university, where they're really focused on our students. They're focused on their research. And then, yes, there's the community aspect and the help there with businesses and economic development. But we're primarily external. So in doing that, we look out into the economy. And again, we have the superpowers like the forecast, the population forecast that we've been doing for a really long time, and say, you know what, we actually see that healthcare is going to be our second largest industry here, surpassing retail trade this year, by the way. Therefore, we should be getting ahead of the curve and helping move the conversations along in healthcare, so that it's not just market forces alone saying we should create more home health aides, but hey, maybe with some intentional efforts between private and public interests, we could get into things like biotechnology and medical manufacturing and recruitment of new businesses here in the healthcare space. And we're nestled next to the 4th largest economy in the world. We know that some people want to be in Nevada too. How could we present that case from an economic development and diversification standpoint? What would that do to our economy? How do we meet or align a workforce around that? And again, we're not the practitioners. We are the optimizing economists, but we help give vision to these ideas and also test them, like what's real and what's probably not. What are the expectations? What is a baseline of expectations we could expect, say, if we were to have more biotechnology in Southern Nevada, and how realistic is that really compared to our peers, compared to the national environment, rent costs, startup costs, the debt environment, all these a little bit more sophisticated things that we can take time to look into while others actually do the application piece.
When you're doing this type of work, how do you handle the shocks to the system? The pandemic was certainly, you don't have a mountain of data on recent pandemics comparable to what we had. We're currently dealing with an energy crisis, basically, or situation. AI is probably more than a shock. It's more of a fundamental tidal wave. How do you handle those things when you're trying to help guide people with the research you're doing, when there isn't really a precedent that you can rely on?
Great point. It depends if we're talking, as usual, short term or long term. In the short term, when you're dealing with shocks to the economic system, the theory does have something to say, be it a pandemic or a financial crisis or an oil shock, as we're currently experiencing. And in the short run, we will do this messaging. We have a weekly newsletter, the Rebel Business Indicators, which our students write, but we edit, and we do put out some messaging through what we think may happen because of it. We do forecasts every quarter that are put out to our stakeholders. We have our annual outlook. And in doing all that, I think our job is to help set expectations of what macro conditions may look like for that will be then impacting both the state as a whole in Nevada, because we're not just Las Vegas, or here in Las Vegas, or even by city or community, what we expect. We have, again, that really powerful tool, the population forecast, that we then can look more long-term and say, how much of an adjustment, say, is the pandemic to this? Because we figured the pandemic was a short-term adjustment to the economy, but then we recovered very quickly, much more than we even anticipated. But along with it came a big demand in population coming out of California. And we were able, I know this because I took over CBER in the middle of the pandemic, is our messaging was, this is bad, but we think that population will continue to grow through this, which means that there will also be job creation and entrepreneurship activities. And then we just released a whole white paper this year in January on entrepreneurship and small business creation during the pandemic. The whole point being is setting expectations of, this is in the short term, this is what we think will happen. Here's where we think will be maybe pain points, but also let's use this as an opportunity once again to think long term. And I know this doesn't answer your question, but maybe if question you're going to answer, I think one of our deficits is we don't think long term enough. I think there are very much good planners in our agencies who are thinking about the long term because they hire us to help them think 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But as a community, we're very much what is going to happen in the next 6 months. And that's not a bad thing when you need to move and pivot quickly, but some of these challenges that we can see aren't going to be fixed in 6 months. And it's going to take a really hard dialogue within the community and among our leaders, no matter what their backgrounds, business, government, nonprofit, whatever, to come together and say, hey, if you want to fix the education system, it's going to be a real hard conversation, but it's going to be a long-term also solution. There is no quick fix. But we can see why we're going to have to fix it, because here's what the things are saying from an economic perspective. Or the thing that keeps us up at night is with recessions and with these shocks, is how vulnerable our economy is. We shouldn't be the poster child for the highest unemployment rate in the nation every time something like this happens and consumer spending falls off a cliff. Now, I just want to be clear to your listeners, we're not forecasting that for this year right now, even with the oil shock. But it is certainly things that we think about. And as economists, also remember, we're always a little more pessimistic and conservative, small c, in our ideas of how things are happening. We try to take more of a backseat approach and monitor things instead of saying, and constantly having to comment and say, this is bad or good, and be referees, because you can lose your credibility pretty quickly because you're not always going to get it right.
I want to make sure we focus on some of the public-facing things that I know are very important to you that your organization does. Could you explain your Rebel Business Indicator newsletter?
Sure. We've been doing this since I took over in June of 2020, but it actually was something I had started when I was running my business, was this weekly newsletter, taking 3 stories out of the news, but applying an economic lens to them and why they matter to Las Vegas or Nevada. Working for our university, the great thing is we can hire students and they work for us, and we don't treat them like students. We treat them as more than interns either. We call them analysts. And as they work for us, they progress through different levels of work. But one of the first things they always do is write articles for our Rebel Business Indicators, which goes out every Monday at 1:30 p.m. And it's 3 articles we pick from the news that we put an economic lens to. Myself and our research director, Dr. Stephen Miller, edit the newsletter. So you get the last word comes from us. But our students get to kind of apply what they're learning in the classroom to, say, current events. They need to use multiple sources and they need to have an original view on it. So it can't just be regurgitation of what one outlet said or one piece of data point out there. But it's there to educate the public, and it's free, by the way. It's right on our website, cber.unlv.edu, to give them, here is a quick snapshot of the stories and the economic stories that we care about and think the public should know about and just keep an eye on, or will be impacting Vegas positively or negatively.
Okay. And then I have to ask you to introduce your Brews and Views series, which I enjoy very much.
Ben, is it because you enjoy the beer or do you enjoy the conversation?
I could go for beer I enjoy the conversation. I really appreciate good content, and I always find a very thoughtful and engaged audience. And that's something that you don't get that at many events.
I appreciate you saying that. So that was also something I started when I took over CBER almost 5 years ago. Every quarter, we pick a bar in Vegas. So we bounce around. And we're starting to hit a point because we're 5 years into this, so we're doing repeats in terms of location. But we pick a topic. Initially, these were just topics I thought were interesting about the economy, and it was supposed to really broaden the conversation around the economy. Why is, I will say it, I think we talk a lot about leisure and hospitality, and I get why. It's 1 in 4 jobs, 1 in $3. It influences half the state's general fund. But I also think there are other interesting industries, from sports medicine to healthcare to even hydrogen economy. That's Air Liquide up in North Las Vegas, to lithium ion batteries, to, marijuana. We've covered a whole wide variety of topics, the arts, film, etc. We do 4 topics a year, and we get the experts here at UNLV as well as the private industry and government experts. I put them on a panel and I ask them questions for an hour and a half. And when they're sick and tired of me, we then throw them to the audience and get a few questions from them and call it a day over beer. But the point is, it's supposed to be casual, conversational, serious, but not so serious that it's buttoned up or anything. It's supposed to be an honest conversation about these topics, be it in all the ones we've mentioned. And the next one is April 16th. And it's on the small business and entrepreneurship in Las Vegas. It's going to be at Bad Beat Brewing and on Main Street in Las Vegas.
I love that you bring the academics and the people from, say, business in this case, and you get the real world mixing with the academic view of things. So it's not just, this is what the academic view of things is. You get that nice, healthy tension between what we think is happening and what somebody's experience is, and that's very valuable. Do you want to also introduce your Outlook event?
Sure. And thank you, Ben, too, for being a big supporter and coming to these events. They are a lot of fun. And it's always good to see both the ones who come to frequently. And then, as you've seen me in the room, I always ask, who's the newbies? Who's is their first brews and economic views that they're being exposed to? Because I'm also always trying to see, like, this is their first time interacting with the Center for Business and Economic Research and this event, and seeing a little bit of what our importance and value to the community is. So yes, we do then this event called Outlook, and I don't need to give a whole history lesson here, but I do want to mention we've been doing this for 35 years. It's our big annual event where we do more of the traditional economic storytelling, where we talk about the current events in the economy over the past year, and then give some forecasts and expectations of what we expect in the following year. We've been doing that since 1991. The first outlook was in January of that year. And the whole point, again, was going back to when the community was growing really fast and there was a lot of change. There also wasn't necessarily a sense of what do we do? What are the expectations for the following year or the next 5 years? And when I read the cover page, because it's a report and a presentation. So you come, it's 2.5 hours, it's breakfast. We do presentations, we get speakers, we give forecasts, we have conversations, we get keynotes. But there's this report component. And I was reading last year as we were going through our archives, the first Outlook report we did in 1991. And it just struck me how some things never change and some things change greatly. Where at that point, my predecessor, Dr. Keith Schwer, he's writing this intro and he says, Las Vegas is facing the most unprecedented amount of change it has ever faced and the greatest amount of uncertainty, to paraphrase. And I'm like, man, that word just never goes away, because I think I could copy and paste some of this and put it today. And I mentioned that last year as I talked about the history of CBER. There's always going to be an unprecedented amount of change and an incredible amount of uncertainty in the economy. But you think back to then, there was only 1 million people. They'd roughly just hit 1 million people living in Southern Nevada. And we would know that they were facing a recession, a national recession. And yet when we look forward from there, they went on the greatest growth spurt Vegas ever experienced until 2007. So from 1991 to 2007. And they didn't know that, but it certainly happened. So it just shows you how unpredictable the future can be, which is why it's a humbling exercise to predict the future. But at the same time, they're setting down the initial expectations for the community of like, how do we deal with this change and how do we deal with this uncertainty so business leaders can actually make a decision and take risk and hire workers and know that how are they going to succeed in an environment that is changing underneath their feet as they speak. Again, very relevant to today. So we've been doing this for 35 years and we'll continue to do it. We've built it into a bigger event. We used to do it when I started twice a year. And I felt that was a little bit too much. One reason is we were having to do 2 forecasts a year. And I worry about, I know it's like catnip for people when they hear, myself included, numbers about where the economy is headed and what someone's forecast. And I see it all the time on Wall Street where they're giving their forecast. And then a month later, they're revising their forecast. And then a week later, because something like today, the Iran conflict happens and they're revising their forecast again. It just loses credibility, in my opinion. So I'm like, let's do it once a year. And that is our report card. And I do show our forecasts for the rest of the year when I go and give public talks. And I say, here's how we're doing. We either nailed it or we not nailing it based on what we said in November. And here's why, because no one could have predicted the pandemic, or who knew about, say, an oil shock when oil supply and oil prices were actually forecasted to go down, not up now. So that's how we've set the tone with the event, is that it's not a everyday kind of thing, but once a year, we're going to make an actual forecast. And you're going to walk away, hopefully, with some hard information of how you make decisions for the year ahead. It's not just about my posterity. It's about really how we get this information out in the community, and then people can feel confident in making decisions in the year ahead and better about those decisions, given that there's always going to be uncertainty and change.
Yeah, I'd like to wrap up on the Las Vegas question, follow up a little bit about what you just said. The next few years, we're dealing with a lot of challenges. The word unprecedented gets used way too often, but it's true. What are some of the things that we really need to address and get right to do well in the next?
Sure. Look, I'll just lend my opinion. If I knew all the answers, I'd probably be getting paid the big bucks and have all sorts of fancy things or something. I can say from my 5 years running CBER and all the projects we've been involved in and the conversations, which we're truly grateful for, I think the biggest thing holding us back is a vision. I can't tell you exactly what is the vision for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I can tell you what the population forecast, the income levels, the demographics, the jobs, what's the actual vision. And when I look at our peers, because we've done these kind of studies where we look at Phoenix and we look at San Diego and we look at Salt Lake, Denver, Boise, what kind of city are they growing into or want to be? Same with the states. Again, we're not just Vegas, we're the state. Also, I'm not quite sure what that vision looks like. I think in my understanding, it could be wrong, but from a historical level is Nevada has always been a place for dreamers and risk takers. Sometimes those dreams don't go well, and sometimes they go very well. That's why you get this boom or bust cycle, is that we've been reliant on industries that have these ups and downs. And gaming had a phenomenal run and continues to have a strong run in this community and will still be number one, we believe, 20 years from now. I'd love to know what's going to be the strong number two. What is it? Is it going to be healthcare? Is it going to be manufacturing? Is it going to be some incredible startup? Or are we just going to leave it to someone else to make that decision, which, given where the global environment is, it worries me that we're kind of get tussled in the economic winds. And I get some of this, a lot of this we can't control. But if I look at success stories for other communities, they had a vision and it was beyond just any one leader. It was beyond any one organization or industry, but everyone could rally behind it, and they might have different ways of how that's implemented and what is really best for the public. That's a worthy debate, but they still had a vision of what they ultimately wanted to be. And those visions 10, 15, 20 years later turn out to work really well for them. There's no reason Phoenix over Vegas from a natural competitiveness 20 years ago should be now getting computer chip factories and making silicon chips for TSM and Intel. And yet they made a choice 20 years ago based on what they thought they could really build up in terms of their competitive advantage, engineering, and particularly very high-tech information system. I'd love to know what we want to do in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years in that realm. I can tell you we've modeled it. I can tell you we think there are lots of opportunities in healthcare given the demand with an aging population and the fact that is highly regulated. So it actually prevents some of the worry about automation from AI, though AI can also be really helpful and profound. And I think in healthcare, if done the right way and not just focused on automation, but on augmentation of the human workforce. I think there are possibilities in manufacturing, as we saw in Reno, is a great case for how to diversify economy, again, around a vision. But that would, again, require some sacrifices and also some long-term investment in our workforce, which I don't know if we've ever done, to be frank. And that's, again, this who's going to be the leader to kind of step up and say, this is not only good for business, but good for the community and for jobs and for taxpayers.
Wrapping up on CBER, is there anything you didn't get to talk about that you wanted to make sure you covered?
Maybe just talk a little bit about how, if we're evolving, you too, as an organization, that might be of interest to your listeners. There's a lot of conversation and lots of opinions out there about how artificial intelligence is going to change the workforce and how it's the best thing since fire was invented. And it certainly is a higher institute of higher education. We at UNLV and Lee Business School and at the Center for Business and Economic Research are paying close attention to how AI is being implemented and how that changes the demand function for new workers. So for our graduates and how well they're getting jobs and how our education then and how we train our students is evolving. I can tell you with my small team of 7 students, plus our staff of 7 to 8 individuals and PhDs, so together 15. The way we're thinking about this and trying to more internalize this is we're using AI. It would be like saying, let's keep using whale oil lamps instead of light bulbs if we weren't using AI. That being said, I think we already see that It has great productivity power to enhance human ability to speed up learning. As when I was going through grad school, even just 5 years ago, to learn data science took years. You could do boot camps and that helped get you in, but it really meant years of taking really frustrating for me, frustrating type classes, long hours. If your code didn't get right, you're tearing your hair out. AI speeds all this up. It can tell you what to do, but even then, it doesn't always run it quite right. It doesn't quite do what you want it to do, but it can speed up the process tremendously. And it can speed up the training process because you can ask it the question, train me how to do this, and not just do it for me. And so with our students, we see that where they really want to have pride in their skills. So they are hesitant at times to use it because they're not cheaters. They don't want to feel like they're cheaters because they're getting the AI to do the work for them. At the same time, we believe in our organization to have a lot of self-starters, a lot of people who can train themselves because it's not like I'm formally training them on every piece of software. There's software out now that we use at CBER that I wasn't trained on when I was in grad school. And so we have to kind of come up with our own way to learn it ourselves. And a lot of us, again, are self-learning it. And so we're using AI to help speed up that process. And so that we can then do more and not less. There's this paradox. I may be getting the name wrong. It's like the Jovian paradox, but the way it goes, and we see this kind of playing out a little bit in the real world right now, is that if you can speed up the productivity of people and the output, even with machines, so AI, then the cost goes down, which then Silicon Valley's thinking is then you won't need the human element, you'll only need the automation. And where I have a bone to pick with that is that, yes, but this is why they're not economists. And I'm willing to say that, just like I'm not a computer scientist. But then that also means that more people demand that service. And if more people demand that service and you can do more, not less, because your productivity has been increased, then your wages go up. They don't go down. As you see with AI scientists, it's 96% of Meta's free cash flow goes to just paying these AI stock options to these AI scientists. My point being is their labor costs have gone up, not down, because of AI. And you see this in basic things like radiology. They said that 8 years ago, they said, don't come in radiologist because AI, and at the time is machine learning, can do it all. You don't need to be, no one should study. Actually, there's a shortage in radiologists because costs went down, productivity went up, demand went up because more of us could afford those services. And now you need more workers. Now, that's a long-term utopian romantic view of things. I get it's going to be a heck of a lot more complicated. But in our own little small world at CBER, that's the way we're thinking about this, and internally changing some of our structures so that we're not spending so much time on the back end. We're using AI to make clean up data a lot faster because a lot of times you spend hours or days cleaning up data only to actually do the function that took 2 hours. So that means we're going to be doing more, not less, is what I'm getting at. And that's what I'm preparing for. I'm preparing to do more, not less, with AI.
It's the Chinese
Yeah.
living.
Well, as always. And I think there's always opportunity out there, just whether you're willing to see it and find it. And yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating what's going on right now. Let me ask you some fun questions to get us to land this plane. Some recommendations. Is there a book that you've given most often as a gift or that you recommend?
I did. Yeah. So I don't have a book that I don't give people books normally. I do have a whole bunch of books here and at home, and I do loan our books out to students. What I do, and I always recommend to folks for more serious reading, but not everyone's into that, is I always like to read whoever's the most recent winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics. I like to read their book. So the most recent one I read was Power and Progress with Simon Johnson and Darian, I'm going to say his last name wrong, but Armaglu at MIT. And it's all about technology and evolution of machine and man. But this conflict too, that it was more of a choice in how we use machines and what was the outcome, and did it make humans more productive or less productive, or was it used to kind of force down wages? And we get around to the industrialists of the 1880s. So I always encourage that. And then a book I told my parents to read recently because I think they'd enjoy it is Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis, which I had to read recently and really enjoyed. I didn't think I'd enjoy. And then for fun, I read sci-fi. I like, again, maybe that's just because I'm a nerdy economist, but I like sci-fi. I feel like detaches your brain from the real world and gets you out of your comfort zone. And I really enjoy those books. Plus, I love a good history book.
All right. You mentioned you've been in Vegas about 15 years. How would you say it's different today when you
Yeah,
first arrived?
great question. I would say that the quality of life and thinking more about residents and not just simply visitors has really been an interesting switch since I've been here. So when I came here, going to the strip was the place to go. And now it's more of the neighborhoods and how the neighborhoods beyond the strip have really improved. They've still, and you see a lot of entrepreneurship, especially since the pandemic, and a sense of community ever since October 1 in 2017 or the pandemic, more of a sense of community in, at least in my opinion. And again, part of that community is supporting local businesses, local business owners, more of that entrepreneurial small business excitement that happens when you see, say, someone who's very successful on the strip take an idea they've then had and apply it to somewhere in Chinatown or in Summerlin or East Las Vegas or Henderson or North Las Vegas, open up that business or start that online service or whatnot. But I've seen a lot more of that pride and taking more of kind of aspect of creating neighborhoods and a local economy and commerce.
All right. And other than your own, which is a wonderful example, what are some organizations that help you connect with people around?
That's a good question. There's a long list of organizations that do a lot of networking and connecting. You're probably asking what's the one that I have found. I think more recently, where I'll just tell you where recently I've got more involved is beyond just the typical business community, because that's initially where we were really interacting, but we've gotten more into the biotech community because there's it's small, but very strong amount of people who believe that industry could flourish here. And that's very interesting to see. Then there is, of course, the Econ Club of Las Vegas, who I've been able to connect with people beyond just my initial circle because of. And then the arts community has been really interesting to see it flourishing here. There was a lot of excitement about different proposals out there, but I think it will, like film. But I guess my point is I think it will flourish no matter what if you have the right mix of people. And I see that happening. And I'm very excited about the Las Vegas Art Museum and what that could bring and put us on the map is a cultural and arts destination and not just simply a tourism destination, but there is art tourism too. So I've been getting more involved on those fronts. In addition to working with local nonprofits, I've been on the board of Leaders in Training for almost 4 years now, which is a local nonprofit for students looking to go to college in East Las Vegas.
Oh, it's wonderful. That's a great list. A little more fun question. What is your favorite meal in Las Vegas?
Well, that's a hard one because it's really like what side of town are you on? I think, again, that's what I've really seen improve is that there are neighborhoods with their own culinary cliques and unique options. So initially, as my wife would tell you, I'm a big Francophile. So I love good French food. And is it Bar Bohemian, that James Tree's new place on Main, has been a favorite, of course, with Esther's. But then I think of Chinatown and all the great ramen places there in Noodle. But then what's so funny about Chinatown is it's not Chinese food. It's of course Japanese and Filipino and Vietnamese, but then it's also some of the best Spanish food I have found, or fusion with all of those. And then I guess then to throw you a curveball for me, I'm a big croissant connoisseur. So I will travel 40 minutes to go have coffee with someone, but specifically to try the croissant at someone's new bakery. And so There's several of those across the valley, and I leave them good reviews, and they all have their unique vibe. So I've done that a bunch too. Yeah,
Now I'm hungry. Thank you. And then what is your favorite spot to view the city?
that's a good question. I know there's lots of people who would say probably anything from Circa and the bar and the deck they have there, Legacy Club. There's I forget what they're calling it now, but at Resorts World, there's the foundation when I first started dating my now wife, we used to go to at Mandalay Bay. But I will argue for something different. I am a big hiker and mountaineer. So I think it's always really neat to look at Vegas from not just Red Rock, but Mount Charleston and going up to the ridge line there as you go to the summit and the peak. And especially this time of year, once the snow melts, it's just pretty incredible to see the vastness behind you and around you and have that 360 view and feel like the planes are just flying right over your head as they're coming into land.
That's a great answer. And the last question, if you could share a phrase or an idea or quote with millions of people, what would that be?
I don't know if I have one off the top of my head. I might be. It's not that it's because you're asking me to quote it directly and try to remember the exact words of what the specific person off the top of my head. Okay, as an economist, let me cite another economist because that's part of the profession. I think this about human behavior and why we see certain things happen, even though we know individuals should be doing the right thing and they don't always do the right thing or say the right thing, even though they know better. And it's John Maynard Keynes, big if you're in the field of economics. He's profound, but he talks about basically that it's better to fail conventionally than succeed unconventionally. So it's better and you're rewarded basically to go along and say, oh, we all knew that was going to happen at the end of the day, when in reality, you might have actually known that it wasn't going to happen, or you could have done something differently or said something differently, but you didn't want to stand out from the herd. And so that's something that I've come to mind frequently when I've thought about our own work of, are we just following the herd and saying what everyone else is saying, or what are we saying or doing that could be having more impact, but may not go with conventional wisdom? And should we be putting that out there more vocally as part of our mission?
All right. That's a very good closing note. I want to thank you very much. Thank you also for your work and your focus on education and community. And just really appreciate your
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to do it and happy to always be a resource for you. And I'll hope to see you at the next Brews and Economic Views on April 16th.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.